SACP will also push for the development and expansion of the publicly owned economic sector to take care of the material needs of the people. The working class needs to unite behind the strategic imperative and to defend the public economic sector against neoliberal and state capture agendas. Joint action by the progressive trade union movement remains essential. As a matter of fact, this Central Committee said the SACP must prioritize supporting joint actions by the trade unions across federations to fight common battles. They can't afford to be divided when the capitalist bosses are united in making profits at all costs. The SACP will strengthen its efforts and engagements with the progressive trade union movement in this regard to make sure that workers pursue their common interests. Convening a joint summit of the progressive trade union movement is an imperative and can contribute positively to taking this proposal of building worker unity forward. In the same manner, the Central Committee tasked the Politburo and the Secretariat of the SACP to initiate a process to convene a conference of left forces. This action is in line with the SACP's resolution to build a popular left front. The Conference of the Left should reflect on the multiple crises facing South Africa, the persistent high rates of growing unemployment, poverty, inequality, and the associated crises of families struggling to make ends meet, as well as this Conference of the Left must focus on what is to be done with regards to the energy crisis and the climate change crisis that is facing us. This, we hope, will serve as a platform to expand consultation on a joint program of action and mobilization. As the SACP, we are saying, we've been arguing for our own policy perspectives in front of the televisions for too long now. It's time really for more action. Not that we have not taken action in the past, like we've done with the financial sector and with land issues, but we want to intensify this by broadening and bringing together the forces that have got a common interest with us in realizing the defeat of both the state capture agenda and the neoliberal agenda. On the just energy transition, the SACP invited Comrade Barbara Creasy in her capacity as the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs. She made a very good presentation on the environment, climate change, and a just green transition. The minister also briefed the Central Committee about the outcomes of COP26, the Conference of Parties on the Environment and Climate Change that was recently held in Scotland. The SACP commits to support the progressive thrust of the government's program on this front towards achieving net zero carbon emissions, whilst also mobilizing progressive forces on the ground. But at the same time, the Central Committee said we must not allow developed countries to set an agenda on climate change that simply suits them and at the expense of developing countries. Investment in Eskom and state capacity in the renewable power generation capacity and building social ownership in energy provision is a key imperative for a just transition. Putting profit-seeking interests before the people using energy as a commodity will only result in unjust practices. Doing so will condemn the state to a procurer exposed to the whims of the private wealth accumulation market. Energy will not be produced to serve the people if it is privatized, and it will not advance national development imperatives. In short, and to put this simply, renewables, for instance, in energy must not be the exclusive preserve of the private sector. Eskom and communities must actually be involved in the areas of energy and renewable energy, so that this is not just like a private sector driven thing. Protecting workers and creating alternative employment must be part of what is called the just transition. Any transition that will cause misery through retrenchments, amongst others, and leaving ghost towns behind will be unjust. Also important, while considering international development, South Africa must plan the transition from the standpoint of our national priorities and our challenges. On the unemployment crisis, unemployment rose in the third quarter of 2021 by 0.5% to 34.9%, affecting 7.6 million active unemployed work seekers. Looking at the total picture represented by what is known as the expanded definition, South African unemployment crisis is worse than is depicted by the officially preferred narrow definition. It is a disastrous 46.6%, having increased by 2.2% in the third quarter of 2021. This affects approximately 12.9 million active and discouraged work seekers. This monumental disaster needs to be understood in all its dimensions, including race, gender, age, and geography. In this way, South Africa will inform its interventions in a much better way. Just to explain this, unfortunately, but scandalously, near 30 years after our democratic breakthrough, unemployment is strongly marked by racial and gendered features. African unemployment is at a shocking 51.1%. That is amongst the African people. Unemployment among all women is at 55.1% compared to 42% for men. Youth unemployment is a catastrophic 77.4% for those aged between 15 to 24 and 55.3% for those aged 25 to 34 years. Geographically, the worst unemployment levels are in rural areas. The former Bantustans are the hardest hit. They still resemble their status under apartheid as labor reservoirs for monopoly capital and productive activity in metropolitan areas. In the former Bantustan areas, for instance, there is no industrial development and notable job opportunities. There is little, if any, at all opportunities for sustainable livelihoods in these former Bantustan areas. You can smell poverty in the Bantustan areas, in particular, in the former Bantustan areas. Policies aimed at addressing the unemployment crisis must also be aimed at achieving transformation in terms of race, in terms of gender and youth, and also to prioritize rural development so that we roll back uneven development and unequal distribution of investment and resources. On social policy and public employment programs, governmental timidity, or worse still, short-sighted austerity, is simply unacceptable. When government introduced the COVID-19 social relief grant of a meager 350 rands to assist those aged between 18 to 59 who do not receive any social grant, there were over 9.5 million applications. This just shows the level of desperation in our society. Some 6.5 million of these applications were eventually approved. Meager as it is, a certain level of relief nevertheless. But now the medium-term budget policy statement has announced that this extremely small grant will be terminated at the end of March. This will have the effect of leaving the millions of unemployed sinking deeper into deprivation and destitution, with no alternatives amidst the worsening unemployment crisis and the economic impact of the emerging fourth wave of COVID-19. It is imperative that the widest range of working class and popular forces actively mobilize in the coming period for the social relief distress grant to be extended at least beyond March, and that the amount is significantly increased, and that this becomes a first and rapid step towards establishing a universal basic income grant and the establishment of a comprehensive social security system. By the way, there is no contradiction, and also there is no choice between the social relief grant and provision of money for education and skills development in order to empower especially young people to be able to make sustainable livelihoods for themselves. Both things need to be done. And some of the immediate intervention intervention should include scaling up of public employment programs, both to provide relief against unemployment and to expand the provision of skills development. Public employment programs will contribute positively towards establishing the right to work in our country. The SACP is going to be throwing everything into calling for and supporting and actively encouraging government to provide public employment programs, because there are so many things that needs to be done in our communities that require public employment programs, like cleaning of our townships and villages and providing of social and economic structures in our townships and villages. All those are important platforms for public employment programs. On taking forward the fight against COVID-19, we wish to salute, as the SACP, the work of South African scientists through genomic surveillance. This work has helped and even provided leadership to the entire world in identifying new variants of COVID-19. The Central Committee denounced the imperialists and other governments that have shut the borders of their countries against entry by South African and Southern African people. As if, by the way, the Omicron variant of COVID-19 originated in Southern Africa. The fact of the matter is that the spread of this virus right now is global. And in fact, the new variant may have come from anywhere in the world, including from outside the African continent. This assumption that this came from the African continent is wrong. And in any case, we are closing the borders after the fact. And I feel like this time using, sorry for the language, the best description of what the advanced countries are doing. That they think they're going to have vaccines, vaccinate their populations, and leave the developing world to see for itself and hope to defeat COVID-19 and hope that they will close their borders. That won't work. According to a colleague of ours and a comrade of ours from the Communist Party of the United States of America, he said such an approach, it's like all of you, we are in the swimming pool having a nice swim, and then having a corner of the swimming pool being reserved for those who want to pee. That's what is actually happening. In the face of this situation, the SACP calls on all our people, nevertheless, to go out to vaccinate in numbers as the best way to fight against this deadly virus, whilst also at the same time maintaining the health protocols of physical distancing, washing our hands, using sanitizers, and wearing our masks. The SACP calls upon government to urgently also resolve the matter of medicines acquired by the South African National Defence Force from Cuba. The South African Health Regulatory Authority, the Central Committee said, must stop making statements on this matter of Cuban medicines to the South African National Defence Force, must stop making statements that are insensitive, that in fact border on recklessness, and make their statements come across as if SAPRA is imposing a second blockade on Cuba after the United States. To actually say we're going to go and impound these medicines and destroy them is offensive to the majority of the people of South Africa. That's not the role of a regulatory agency or any other agency of the state. We have diplomatic relations with the Cubans who sacrificed their lives to make sure that we have a democratic South Africa today. The Central Committee said we must communicate this statement very strongly. It doesn't take kindly to this. On international situation and solidarity, the SACP expressed its concern about situations of instability in the Southern African region. Besides political and economic challenges in Lesotho, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, and Mozambique, the SACP is concerned about what seems to be an impending instability in Botswana. The tensions between the current president President Masisi, and former President of Botswana, Ian Khama, pose a serious problem of instability in that country if not watched carefully. We are also concerned that the South African Reserve Bank seems to be unfairly implicated in funds allegedly stolen in Botswana. We know that this is not the case and it must be corrected. SADC, we're calling upon it to pay close attention to this developing situation in Botswana so that it does not lead to instability. Our region cannot afford any more instability, and least South Africa, by the way, because every area of instability in the SADC region has got huge implications for South Africa in particular. We are calling for the intervention also, led by SADC, to be intensified in Swaziland, especially the establishment of inclusive dialogue processes amongst all political formations. This, we say, must be expedited so that a negotiated transition to democracy is realized in Swaziland. The SACP also denounces the call made by imperialist countries to boycott the Beijing Winter Olympics in China, ostensibly as part of the new Cold War waged by the United States on China. This is all because of China's impressive economic growth and development that is advancing to surpass the United States economy. The SACP wishes to pledge its solidarity with the people of Sudan in their struggle for democracy, the people of Western Sahara in their struggle against occupation by Morocco, and the people of Palestine against occupation by the apartheid Israeli regime. We also reiterate our solidarity with Cuba and saying that Cuba has a right to pursue its own economic program. Also, our solidarity with the Venezuelan people, the Bolivian people, and Nicaragua against US-led imperialist aggression. We welcome the re-emerging consolidation of and advances by left and progressive forces in Latin America, including in countries like Peru, Honduras, and Chile. This underlines our point that neoliberalism is not the solution, but the cause of the problems and challenges faced by the workers and poor in the world. Increasingly, the people of Latin America are rejecting these neoliberal programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, GS. Let me invite questions from our media colleagues. Thank you, Sacp. And you will be number 2. I said, is there any other questions? Let's take your selection first there, and
System Zimande and the rest of the SACP officials, essentially, when you look and you speak about what you term unholy alliances in the minority governments within the metros, till today, no governments have been formed in these metros. There are no MMCs. What needs to be done in order for these metros to have effective governments being constituted by the coalitions that have been formed that will service the people? Secondly, your statement speaks of the IFP. As a former student in northern KwaZulu-Natal, in Zimande, someone who's worked with many ANC leaders in that province to change the electoral fortunes of your governing party within that province, what does it mean when you see the resurgence of the IFP, and particularly with the plan that they had to have an entire blockade of the northern provinces by taking all the district municipalities and local municipalities in order to launch an offensive to take over the province? As someone who's worked in ANC structures in that province, what does the recent local government results mean for the future of that province of KwaZulu-Natal? And then lastly, you speak about disunity and lack of cohesion within the governing party. This has been pretty much in your statements for the past 6 or 7 years. Is the ANC just simply irreparable and can't have any cohesion and must just simply implode? Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Should I go ahead?
Yes.
Yeah, some guy. We knew that you always fire salvos, you know. But that's your job. We respect that. Precisely. The point we are raising about the failure of these minority governments in the metros to form a government underlines the point we are saying. It's a sign already that there's going to be huge instability because it's minority governments that are not forged on principles. They are based on an anti-ANC platform instead of being based on uniting for provision of services and changing the circumstances of the workers and the poor of our country. It also shows the extent to which, of course, there's been fragmentation in the voting of the people, and we have explained partly the non-voting as well, non-voting bloc, that has led us to this unfortunate situation. On our side, we are saying where we are the opposition, the ANC and its alliance partners, we must watch the situations there very closely, and we must have mass-based opposition, not for the sake of oppositionism, but to point out what is it that needs to be done correctly. That is going to be our responsibility. If you ask me what is to be done, that's going to be our responsibility. But we are in for a rocky period. There is no doubt about that because there is no principle. We've never had a party saying, our whole aim of participating in the election was to dislodge the ANC. What kind of a program is that? A negative program. So the result is what we are seeing now. Unfortunately, such instability means worse for the ordinary people of our country who desperately need services. My comrades will add on this. On the resurgence of the IFP, it's a sad development. Because, by the way, the ANC had made, and its allies, huge advances in KZN. 2019 and even in 2016, by the way. As the only party, really, that is capable, the African National Congress, of pursuing a progressive agenda. But again, largely, if we are to be honest, we need to be self-critical. The ANC needs to be self-critical in KZN, together and its allies, as to the reasons why we've actually lost so much ground. And it's a reflection of the problems that we've actually said. Factionalism, deep internal divisions, marginalization of the alliance. And we've always, you are right, been warning as the SACP that those of our comrades in the ANC who think that the ANC can make advances by alienating its allies, the SACP and COSATU, are wrong. They must disabuse themselves of that. Partly of what we are seeing is precisely this. But also we are saying is that there is an economic interest that has been growing inside the structures of the ANC as well. What we call a bureaucratic and parasitic petty bourgeoisie, which is capturing municipal budgets for purposes of personal accumulation. We must face that. KZN also partly is a result of that because with that happening, there's been very poor provision of services. We must take to heart the message that is from our people. And we know these problems. The ANC itself has said it, by the way, which is good in its own assessment, you know. Let me just tell you one example. For me, Samgele, when I was campaigning, I'm sorry if I'm taking long. It was in my hometown, in an area which is predominantly working class Indian community. They point a building, you know, which is like the size of 2 RDP houses. They say, this is the 3rd municipal campaign now. We are coming, over the past 10 years, we are coming to us to say we must vote for you. Look at that building. We have asked the municipality not to build, to demolish that building. In 10 years, the municipality can't demolish, let alone building, just to demolish that building. Now, those are some of the things that must be. There's nothing as easy as demolish to build this. Now, those are some of the things we must accept as a movement. And that moving forward, we must not allow those things to happen. Those are some of the things that have cost us in KZN. Otherwise, how do you explain the advances we make